Good morning, everybody. We've been looking forward to doing this for absolutely ages, and Chris promised that you'd find us somewhere in the schedule. We kept getting bumped along for, I don't know, internationally famous authors who came to talk to you, but it's our chance at last. And I'm here representing the public engagement team, who are secreted among you. Neil's up in the gallery. And as Matthew said, we want to do two things. I'd like to say that the collections items aren't the only focus. We want to use them to show you how we think about doing sessions for schools and something of the process of that. So we've chosen a selection from one of our sessions that we call Collections Up Close, but you probably think of as a show and tell that we use. And this one's aimed at GCSE history students. It's also, we're doing this by way of thanks to all the colleagues who help us, because without you we couldn't do these things. So Matthew's here assisting today, thank you very much. Sarah Wheel in the Rare Books department have managed to source us a copy of Robert Hooke's Micrographia that we're actually allowed to use, and we've got some items from the John Johnson collection which Julianne Lambert looked out for us kindly before the session. But that's just for this session, and for all others we do, we really draw on the expertise and of course the precious time of colleagues across the library. So thank you very much, or if you've ever been involved, or if you would like to be. So the origin of this session was a specification change for GCSE history. A specification in old money is a syllabus. So from an old unit, optional unit, which was called Medicine Through Time, to the new unit, which is more focused on public health. So the old unit had lots about surgery and scientific advances. This one still contains elements of that, but it's more looking at public health, the development of public health over 1,000 years really in this country, and also the role of respective groups, the role of the church, the role of state, the role of the crown, the role of professional associations and different groups in that development. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about, some of that sequence. But also, whatever the session is, we always have a couple of questions in mind. We always want to show people what the point of collections is. Why do we keep all this stuff? What the point is, and what's the value of using original sources that's in front of you when so much is available to students online, and we do share resources online. There's an online version of this that we produced during lockdown. The other question that we have in our heads is, so what? What about the kid who walks in here and is going, yeah, so what? How do we engage that person, what we're doing in the collections here? And also their counterpart who walks in here and says, at last, I found my people. People who feel exactly the same way about these wonderful things as I do, but everybody else in my class looks at me and goes, what? So those people we have in mind, and everyone in between those two poles. So we're going to, I've arranged it in a carousel, and you'll notice that unlike most weeks, next to each of the items there's some questions. There will be a test later. But they're questions to prompt thinking, so you can see the way we use them. We've also arranged it in a carousel, and typically with groups we have students moving around between different items rather than static. That's also why we moved all the chairs, as we usually do in these sessions. As I say, the origins of this session were in a specification change, and it was trialled with history teachers in conjunction with the Department for Education in Norham Gardens, and we also trialled it out with a school group from Cheney School as well before we kind of advertised it and put it into use. That's part of the process. So we're starting here in the medieval. The different examples differ in the exact dates that they start this, but essentially it's in the medieval period. And we've got a uroscopy chart. And uroscopy is a way in, that's the examination of a patient's urine, is a way into thinking about that medieval view of medicine. The fact that things come out of your body can give an indication of the balance of the humours which are governing health or ill health. But it's also a theme that runs through that 1,000 years of the medical profession, that if you present yourself to a physician, sooner or later they're going to want a urine sample out of you. And that's as true as today as it was in, say, the 13th, 15th century, I think this book is from. So there's a chart which is designed to aid people in examining urine in flasks. And something that modern students find interesting is that these texts might have been in use for centuries. They're used to textbooks which go out of date very quickly, and there can be, you know, multiple editions in the space of a decade, but a text that remains in use, and you can see the wear and the notes that different people have made in different hands, sometimes different languages, is really interesting. Anyway, fast forward, this is a copy of the Pharmacopoeia, or Pharmacopoeia I call it, Londinensis, which is from the 17th century, and this is pharmacologists codifying recipes. It's a recipe book for how to make medicines. Medicines old and new, as it says on the front, and it's also a weapon. It's a weapon for the pharmacists, stopping those upstart apothecaries from getting it on the action. So it's saying, if you want to dispense medicines, you're going to do it using our book. And we're enlisting the crown, so it's sponsored by the king there. We've also enlisted, you see the top of the frontispiece, God handing it down. And we've got the great and the good from the history of medicine all pointing towards it and offering their support. They're all dead, of course, so they can't argue with it. Interestingly, it's a book that has 2 first editions, because there was a first edition and then they didn't want to talk about that first edition. Another first edition with other recipes came out. They blamed the printers for this. So the printers printed it too quickly. Richard, I know you'll think that's very unfair, and it probably is unfair. It's probably more to do with the battle within the profession about what should go in the book and what shouldn't. That's officialdom, presenting an official face. This item is a smaller item, and it presents another view. It's called The Piss Prophet, or Certain Piss Pot Lectures by Thomas Bryan. Now, you might be thinking that we chose this with that bored so what student in mind. You'd be absolutely right. But also we chose it because it offers another view to that official view. It offers another view. What Bryan is doing is he's railing against a practice which he says is going on rife across London, where both quacks, people who don't know any better, and physicians who should know better are sending their assistants across town to get a urine sample of patient, bringing it back in a flask, examining the urine sample, possibly using a chart similar to that, and then pronouncing on what's wrong with the patient. And Bryan says this is really wrong. He also says the patients are silly because they're expecting this kind of theatrical performance, almost like a magician pronouncing like this. But really what should be happening is the doctor should actually be examining the patient. Might let's think about that if you tried to get a GP appointment recently. Anyway, moving on a little bit at the same time, this is one of my favourite books in the whole world. This is Robert Hooke's Micrographia. So probably aware of Hooke the scientist. If ever at school you were hanging weights on the spring and seeing what happened to find Hooke's law, that's him. But Robert Hooke here has got his hands on one of the very first microscopes. And there are 2 things I love about this book. He writes so well about things that are written. He produces these wonderful drawings that are presented here as engravings in the book. We've got a first edition in the library. It's too fragile to use, but kindly we've got this edition where the plates have been taken out and bound separately, but this is still very fragile. Please don't use it. For some reason, in each edition, the picture of the flea is always the one that people want to look at. We're going to look at that. So I love that. That drawing and the others stand up to scientific scrutiny today. A modern entomologist would look at that and say, yes, that's a great drawing, accurate drawing of a flea. Incidentally, there's a more modern facsimile you can look through if you want to look at some more of the drawings. The other thing is, Hooke is like a kid, any kid who first gets a microscope. He's running around, I imagine running around this room, possibly, you know, in college around the high street, finding anything he'd find, the head of a pin, you know, a hair, anything, insects, He can't work out how to make an ant stand still, so he feeds it a bit of brandy so it'll slow down and he can get it under the lens. And he's writing about that with the same joy of discovery. And so, of course, that is exactly what it's like for every kid who gets their hand on a microscope. Anyway, unfortunately, he hasn't yet worked out the connection between this flea and the plague that is ripping through the country at the time that he is drawing it. Moving on now, a couple of hundred years to the 19th century. This is an item from the John Johnson collection. By now, we have hospitals established. But they're not hospitals that you can just go to if you're ill. If you want hospital treatment, and we'll see in a minute there are reasons you might not want hospital treatment, but if you want some, you need to be recommended by a patron of the hospital. So people pay subscription for the hospital, and then they have the right to recommend other people. So you need to know somebody rich and possibly famous. We think this letter of recommendation, it's certainly signed Wellington, it looks like the Duke of Wellington's signature. They have to recommend you for the hospital. And then there's a whole load of conditions after that, including basically you don't have an infectious disease that might sweep through the hospital. So actually, if you're ill, that might be a reason for you not getting into hospital. There's also a bunch of conditions. And the plea for old linen at the end that they'll use is dressings. They go in that letter, so that's what we're seeing. And that's just a little snippet. There are several of those similar, including blanks in the John Johnson collection. There's a little snippet of hospital administration at the time. Now, one of the reasons you might be wary about entering hospital is there are some key elements of medical care that haven't yet been invented, including anaesthesia and the idea of antisepsis. Of course, Hooke's work with the microscope is laying the groundwork for germ theory and the discovery of microorganisms, a whole world not known about and not imagined earlier on. Here, Joseph Lister is trying to persuade doctors to sterilise their surgical instruments, in fact, their hands as well, before operating on people. Others have had not very much success by presenting case studies of people not dying after surgery. Lister's trying to amass statistical evidence. So he conducts a 3-year study at Glasgow Infirmary of amputations and presents how many people die if we use antisepsis using carbolic acid, and it's fewer than when we don't, and presenting that as evidence. We can see this now as a recognisable scientific paper presenting evidence in a journal that is being disseminated amongst his peers for review. And then finally, the last item, this rather tatty leaflet printed cheaply on cheap post-war paper, was delivered to everybody in the spring of 1948, and it is about the new thing, the National Health Service. I think it is in its own way very, very wonderful. It's also harder to care for, maybe even less robust than this from the 15th century. We've got a facsimile copy. We often sometimes produce facsimiles that students can handle, so you can handle that. But that's telling people the services that the NHS offers and also how to register to a GP. Many of the population never having had a doctor before because they couldn't afford one. Anyway, so, as I say, the questions around are pitched at 15, 16-year-olds GCSE level. We also adapt this for younger audiences by changing the questions, and also we've used it with older audiences as well as I say, with history teachers. And we're just using it as an example of the work we do. But of course, we do a lot of work with primary schools. If you were here last week, you'll have noticed some of the Lego printing we did with families, but we also do that as a primary school activity. And we have similar sessions that are directed at primary school. We're just planning something like Dorothy Croker Hodgkin. And much younger audiences as well that you might have seen in the Codlean. And there's equal care and equal thought goes into all those audiences. It's not, shall I say, intellectually less demanding to plan something for a 2-year-old than it is for somebody doing their A-levels. And I might suggest perhaps what goes on down there is the most important thing, because everybody, every student or academic who walks on through this door to study something is essentially doing that, because at some point somebody put a book in their hand. The book may have been made out of fabric, it may have been made out of cardboard, it might have had lift up flat, it might have been chewed at the corner, it might have made sounds when you press the button. But that was that insight into that wonderful world where every time you turn the page, there might be something wonderful there. So that's all the things we do. And as I say, also a thank you to all of you who have supported us and hopefully will continue to support us in the work that we do. Thank you very much.